What if I told you that in just 1 year, over 100,000 Americans died from something you might not even think about every day? That's more than 8 times the number of people killed in shootings, nearly triple the number lost in car crashes. It's a number so staggering it could fill a stadium, and every single one of those lives was cut short by a drug overdose. Imagine that, a silent killer claiming more lives than some of the worst disasters we've ever seen. And the scariest part? This isn't some distant tragedy. It's happening right now in our neighborhoods, our schools, our families. So why are we still losing so many people to drugs? How did we get here? And what's being done to stop this nightmare? Let's rewind to 2020. The world was already reeling from a global pandemic, but another crisis was exploding in the shadows. Between April 2020 and April 2021, the CDC reported over 100,000 drug overdose deaths in the United States. That's 100,000 mothers, fathers, siblings, friends, gone in just 12 months. To put that in perspective, that's like losing the entire population of a city the size of Flint, Michigan in a single year. And it wasn't just one bad year. From 2019 to 2022, the numbers kept climbing, hitting a peak of 107,941 deaths in 2022. That's a crisis that's been tearing through America for decades, but it's gotten deadlier than ever. Why? Because of one drug that's changed everything: fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. It's so potent that just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, can kill you. Originally, fentanyl was developed as a prescription drug to help people with severe pain, like cancer patients or those recovering from major surgeries. Under a doctor's care, it can be a lifesaver. But out on the streets, it's a different story. Illicit fentanyl, made in secret labs, often in Mexico or China, has flooded the U.S. drug market. It's cheap, it's powerful, and it's everywhere. Drug dealers mix it into heroin, cocaine, even fake pills made to look like Xanax or OxyContin. People take these drugs thinking they're getting something else, and they have no idea they're playing Russian roulette with their lives. In 2023 alone, fentanyl was involved in over 74,000 overdose deaths, nearly 70% of all drug-related deaths in the U.S. That's 200 people dying every single day from this one drug. Think about that for a second. Every day, 200 families get a phone call, a knock on the door, or a visit from the police, telling them someone they love is gone. Maybe it's a teenager who thought they were taking a prescription pill they bought online. Maybe it's an adult struggling with addiction, trying to chase a high they thought they could control. The DEA seized 44 million fentanyl pills and 4,500 pounds of fentanyl powder in just the first 6 months of 2025. That's enough to kill 500,000 people with a single kilogram. And it's not just big cities. Small towns, rural communities, suburban neighborhoods, fentanyl doesn't discriminate. It's in every corner of America. So, how did this drug become the grim reaper of our time? And why can't we stop it? Let's go back to where this all started. The opioid crisis didn't begin with fentanyl. It began decades ago in the 1990s, when doctors started prescribing opioid painkillers like OxyContin at an alarming rate. Pharmaceutical companies pushed these drugs hard, telling doctors they were safe, that addiction was rare. But they weren't safe. By 2013, doctors were writing millions of prescriptions for opioids, 6.2 million in New York alone in 2020, even after years of decline. Back in 2010, over 250 million prescriptions for antidepressants and other mind-altering drugs were written nationwide. 1 in 5 Americans was on some kind of psychotropic medication. That's 70 million people, many of them on drugs that could lead to dependency. And when those prescriptions ran out, or when people couldn't get them legally anymore, they turned to the streets. That's when heroin entered the picture, and soon after, fentanyl took over. This was the first wave of the opioid epidemic. Prescription drugs flooding the market, handed out like candy by doctors and dispensed by pharmacists who often didn't ask enough questions. By 2010, prescription drug overdoses were already killing 27,000 people a year. That's not a small number. It's a tragedy that should have sounded alarms across the country. But instead, the system kept churning. Pharmaceutical companies kept profiting. doctors kept prescribing, and pharmacists kept filling those scripts. And here's where it gets really shocking. Even today, pharmacists are caught in a broken system. They're the ones handing out these powerful medications, but they're also the ones who could catch misuse before it spirals. Yet, too often, they're under pressure to fill prescriptions quickly, with little time to double-check if a patient's history raises red flags. In 2025, a ProPublica investigation exposed how the FDA allowed substandard drug factories overseas to supply the U.S. market for over a decade. That means pharmacists might be dispensing medications that aren't even safe, without even knowing it. Can we really blame them entirely? Or is the system setting them up to fail? Now, let's talk about the second wave heroin. By 2010, as prescriptions for opioids started to drop thanks to new regulations, people addicted to painkillers turned to heroin. It was cheaper, easier to get, and gave a similar high. But heroin overdoses started climbing, peaking around 2016. Then came the third wave, fentanyl. Starting around 2013, this synthetic opioid began flooding the streets, often mixed into other drugs. By 2022, fentanyl was involved in nearly 70% of all overdose deaths. And it's not just heroin users who are at risk. People buying cocaine, meth, or even fake Xanax pills are dying because they don't know fentanyl is in the mix. In 2023, nearly half of all overdose deaths involved both opioids and stimulants like meth or cocaine. That's how deadly this drug has become. It's not just an opioid problem anymore. It's a polysubstance crisis. Here's something that'll make your stomach turn. Kids are dying from this. Between January and June 2021, 1,150 teenagers aged 14 to 18 died from overdoses. That's a 20% jump from 2020 and double the number from 2019. These aren't just bad kids or drug addicts. These are high schoolers, some experimenting for the first time, others trying to self-medicate anxiety or ADHD with pills they bought off social media. The National Crime Prevention Council says 8 out of 10 teen and young adult fentanyl deaths are linked to social media contact. Teens think they're buying a legit prescription pill, but it's laced with fentanyl. In 2023, fentanyl accounted for 76% of adolescent overdose deaths. Imagine being a parent thinking your kid is safe at home, only to find out they took one pill and never woke up. How is this happening in our communities? Why are kids so vulnerable? The answer lies partly in how easy it is to get these drugs. Social media platforms have become a marketplace for dealers, and there's not enough regulation to stop it. Teens are scrolling through apps, seeing posts or messages offering pills for stress, focus, or fun. They don't know they're buying death. And it's not just teens. Adults aged 35 to 44 have the highest overdose death rates, often because they were caught in the earlier wave of prescription opioid overuse and now face a drug market flooded with fentanyl. Men make up about 70 to 75% of overdose deaths, but women aren't spared either. And the crisis hits certain communities harder. Black and Native American populations face higher overdose death rates relative to their population size, and Black Americans are incarcerated for drug offenses at a rate of 33.5 per 100,000, compared to 28.4 for white Americans, even though drug use rates are similar across races. This isn't just a health crisis. It's a social justice issue too. Let's talk about the traffickers for a minute. The DA's 2025 reports paint a chilling picture. Since January 2025, they've seized 44 million fentanyl pills, 4,500 pounds of fentanyl powder, 65,000 pounds of methamphetamine, and 201,500 pounds of cocaine. That's not small-time dealing, that's an industrial-scale operation. The Sinaloa cartel, based in Mexico, is a major player, using precursor chemicals from China to make fentanyl. They're even using narco-subs, submarines, to smuggle drugs into the U.S. In 2025, 6 traffickers from Colombia and Guyana were sanctioned for their role in this network. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection is working overtime, seizing fentanyl at the border, but it's like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. Attorney General Pamela Bondi put it bluntly, "A pill can kill, and too often it does." But here's where it gets even more infuriating. We've known about this problem for decades, and yet it's still getting worse in some ways. The US has spent over $1 trillion since 1971 on the war on drugs, and what do we have to show for it? Over 1 million overdose deaths since 2001. That's 1 million lives lost, 1 million families shattered, and countless communities left reeling. Fentanyl trafficking convictions are up 461% from 2018 to 2023. But the drugs keep coming. Why? Because the system isn't just fighting dealers, it's fighting itself. In 2025, the Trump administration and RFK Jr. fired the entire 17-person team behind the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, the main tool researchers used to track this crisis. Without that data, how do we even know what we're fighting? Experts say this could lead to more deaths, not fewer, because we're flying blind. How can we solve a problem we can't even measure? Pharmacists are caught in the middle of this mess. They're the ones standing behind the counter, handing out prescriptions, trying to balance patient care with the risk of fueling addiction. In New York, a program called iStop, started in 2013, forces pharmacists and doctors to check a patient's prescription history before dispensing controlled substances. This cut opioid prescriptions by millions, but it's not enough. Pharmacists are under pressure to move fast, fill scripts, and keep customers happy. They don't always have time to dig into whether a patient is doctor shopping or if a prescription is suspicious. And with counterfeit pills flooding the market, they're sometimes dispensing drugs they don't even know are dangerous. A 2025 case in Kentucky saw a doctor sentenced to 80 months in prison for illegally distributing controlled substances. And you can bet pharmacists were filling those scripts, maybe without even realizing they were part of the problem. So, are pharmacists the gatekeepers we need, or are they just another cog in a broken machine? Now, here's a glimmer of hope, but it comes with a catch. In 2023, something unexpected happened. Overdose deaths dropped for the first time since 2018. The CDC reported 105,007 deaths in 2023, down from 107,543 the year before. By early 2025, provisional data suggested a 24% decline, potentially saving 27,000 lives a year. That's 70 lives saved every single day. It's the steepest drop in overdose deaths ever recorded in U.S. history. In places like Ohio, deaths fell by 31% in 2024. Vermont saw a 22% drop, and Seattle reported a 15% decrease in overall drug deaths, with fentanyl deaths down 20%. This is huge. This is a sign that maybe, just maybe, we're turning a corner. But why is this happening? Experts aren't entirely sure. Some point to better access to naloxone, a life-saving overdose reversal drug now available over the counter. Others say harm reduction strategies like fentanyl test strips and overdose prevention centers are making a difference. New York's opioid prescriptions dropped by 39% from 2012 to 2020, thanks to stricter regulations. The Biden-Harris administration pushed for more treatment access and public awareness campaigns like the DEA's One Pill Can Kill. But here's the catch. The decline might not last. In January 2025, the CDC reported a slight uptick. 82,138 deaths over the previous 12 months. 1,400 more than the year before. Researchers like Keith Humphreys from Stanford warned this could be a blip or a sign that the progress is stalling. The street drug supply is still deadly, with cocktails of fentanyl, meth, and even xylazine, a veterinary tranquilizer, making overdoses more unpredictable than ever. So, are we really winning this fight, or is this just a brief pause before things get worse? Let's talk about the human cost, because this isn't just about numbers. Every one of those 105,000 deaths in 2023 was a person with a story. Maybe it was someone like Kevin Donaldson in Vermont, who survived the crisis and is now helping others. Maybe it was a teenager who didn't know the pill they took was laced with fentanyl. Or an adult who got hooked on painkillers after a surgery and ended up on the streets. The crisis hits hardest in places like West Virginia, where fentanyl overdose deaths reached 60.8 per 100,000 people in 2022, the highest rate in the country. California, Florida, and New York saw thousands of deaths, each 6,453, 5,083, and 4,950 in 2022. respectively. But even states with lower rates, like South Dakota with just 38 deaths, aren't immune. Every community is touched by this. And it's not just about the people who die. Families are torn apart. Kids lose parents. Parents lose kids. Communities lose hope. The economic toll is staggering too. Addiction and overdoses cost the U.S. billions in healthcare, lost productivity, and law enforcement. Back in 2002, 8.2% of full-time workers were using illicit drugs, and among 18 to 25-year-olds it was 19%. That's a workforce struggling to function, a generation fighting to survive. And the ripple effects don't stop there. Schools are now stocking naloxone because kids are overdosing. Social media companies are under fire for letting dealers sell drugs online. And the justice system is overwhelmed, with drug-related arrests in states like South Dakota leading the nation. So what's the way forward? There's no single answer, but there are pieces of the puzzle coming together. Harm reduction is one. Naloxone, which reverses opioid overdoses, is saving lives. Fentanyl test strips let users check if their drugs are laced. Overdose prevention centers, though controversial, are giving people a safer place to use. Treatment is another key. Medications like buprenorphine and methadone can help people recover from opioid addiction, but only 1 in 5 people with opioid use disorder gets the treatment they need. Why? Because of stigma, cost, and a system that often prioritizes abstinence over practical help. And then there's enforcement. The DEA and CBP are seizing record amounts of drugs, but they're up against cartels with endless resources. The Biden-Harris administration invested $42.5 billion in 2023 to fight the crisis, focusing on treatment, prevention, and stopping the drug supply. But with the NSDUH survey team gone, we're losing the data we need to track progress. How do we fight a war without a map? Pharmacists could be part of the solution, but they need better tools. Programs like iStop are a start, but they're not everywhere. Pharmacists need real-time data to spot suspicious prescriptions, training to recognize addiction, and support to say no when something's off. They're not just pill counters, they're on the front lines. But they're also human, working in a system that's stretched thin. And let's not forget the bigger picture. Pharmaceutical companies like Purdue Pharma, who fueled this crisis, are finally facing consequences. In 2025, the Sackler family agreed to pay over $4.5 billion for opioid abatement, with New York getting $200 million. But is that enough to undo the damage? Can money bring back the lives we've lost? As we look at 2025, there's hope, but it's fragile. The 27% drop in overdose deaths in 2024 was historic, saving 81 lives a day. But 220 Americans are still dying every day from overdoses. That's not a victory. It's a reminder of how far we have to go. Fentanyl is still out there, mixed into everything from cocaine to counterfeit pills. Teens are still at risk buying drugs on social media, and communities of color are still bearing a disproportionate burden. This crisis started with prescription pads and greedy corporations, but it's grown into something much bigger. A beast fed by international cartels, systemic failures, and our own inability to act fast enough. So, I ask you again, why are we still losing so many people to drugs? How did we let this crisis spiral so far? And what are we going to do about it? The answers aren't easy, but they start with facing the truth. We need better data to understand the problem. We need pharmacists and doctors to be empowered, not pressured. We need treatment that's accessible, not a privilege. And we need to stop the flow of fentanyl at its source, whether that's a lab in Mexico or a social media app. This isn't just a public health crisis, it's a test of who we are as a country. Are we going to let another 100,000 lives slip away? Or are we going to fight back? The choice is ours, but the clock is ticking.